Quilting is full of 100-year-old myths and lies. There are so many things that I've heard that just plain aren't true. You have to pre-wash your fabrics. You can't pre-wash your fabrics. Use steam, don't use steam. You can't use this thread with this machine, and so on and so forth. Guys, we are here to debunk all of the quilting myths starting right now. Let's talk about the first myth in quilting, and it's all about moisture and steam. Some groups say you can only pre-wash your fabrics to get a good quality quilt. Others don't do it at all. Some people that make show quilts only pre-wash, others do not. Let's talk about the science behind it and debunk the myths right now. The reason that people talk about pre-washing is due to two reasons. The first is shrinkage of material, and the second is color fastness. Now, the reason that people talk about this is because it depends on what type of substrate you're using. If you're using a 100% quilting cotton top with a different substrate back like flannel or minky, shrinkage is going to play a part in the overall finished product of your quilt. Quilting cotton shrinks between 3 and 5%. This depends on manufacturer, the quality of the goods, the type of gray good, as well as what square the cotton is. That means how many stitches or knots or weaves there are within a square inch. So we're gonna use this quilt behind me as an example. This quilt here is a 100% good quality quilter's cotton on the quilt top. Now, if it's backed in something like this minky is polyester. Polyester does not shrink. You have a artificial fiber on the back, fiber if you can call it that on the back, and you have a natural fiber on the front. So in this case, if I don't want my quilt to look very wrinkly once it is washed, okay, I am going to pre-wash my quilt top fabric, so my quilting cottons. They're gonna do their natural shrinking between, like I said, 2, 3 to 5%, and the back is not going to shrink at all, right? So once I quilt these together, there won't be any shrinkage after we wash this quilt. Flannels shrink between 5 and 10% and even up to 15% depending on what brand of flannel you're using. Same thing in that situation. Let's say you have a quilter's cotton top, the back is flannel, the back's gonna shrink much more than the front's going to, and it's going to give a little bit more of a distorted look on the quilt top. That is why people say to pre-wash and not to pre-wash. That's the first reason. Second reason is color fastness. Now, a lot of people worry about making a beautiful quilt like this, then all of a sudden your red bleeds into your blue, into your cream, into your white, etc. Okay, we do not want that to happen. We want your quilts to stay color fast like this. Now, most fabrics, depending on if you're buying good quality fabrics, stay color fast due to the treatment and the processes of the fabric as it's coming from the manufacturer, okay? Color catchers are always a good option if you're worried about bleeding, but that is the other reason why people say pre-wash individually, that way there isn't any of that bleeding. Now that you know all the reasons why, there's no myth here, just science. Back to steam and moisture. Some people say you cannot put steam, starch, craft spray, any of those things onto your fabric. It will ruin your quilt, it will change its lifespan, it will loosen the fibers, etc. Okay? Another quilting myth. There are different reasons why you would use steam or starch as opposed to doing it hot and dry, depending on what kind of a quilt you're doing. Now, we have Best Press, we have Quilters and Crafting Spray, we have Flatter. There's all different kinds of products that we use in the quilting industry that help us with our quilting. Starches, steam, water, none of those things are going to change the integrity of the materials you're working with. If I spray this here with starch and I let it dry, it's not going to have damaged or degraded the fibers that are used in the quilt. It's just not how it works. So why is it that this myth has come about? Now, the things that we have seen as far as traveling within the quilting industry, going to quilt shows, going to market, is that there are a lot of geographic myths. Why that is, I'm not quite sure. But we've heard everything under the sun, and sometimes it just plain comes down to the myth is there because that's the way that mom did it, or that's the way the quilt stores in the area have taught. I'll give you a perfect example. I've heard lots of times that this brand of machine doesn't like this type of thread. That's because a different thread is sold by the manufacturer that also makes the machine. Or the dealership that sold you that machine sells a different type of thread, so they're therefore promoting and trying to upsell the products that they use. I know it sounds a little shady, but that is absolutely the fact of why some myths come into play. Maybe you live somewhere where someone sells a particular type of iron that's a steam iron, and they say absolutely make sure you iron with steam. Other places don't, and they say absolutely not, don't do it. That is how myths start within the industry and are continued to be perpetuated. So if I asked each one of you here on this video and said, hey, what's the best sewing machine brand? Brother, Bernina, Janome, Juki, etc., based on what you learned how to sew on, based on what your mom sewed on, based on what your friend sews with, is greatly going to influence your opinion on those things and continue to perpetuate the myths of Bernina doesn't make this product, or Brother doesn't make this product, or this person does embroidery better than that person, all based on what you've been taught. Now let's talk about the next myth within the quilting industry, and that is all about threads. I'm sure that you've heard that some threads can't be used with certain machines. I'm sure you've heard about different weight threads and what they do or don't do. I'm sure you've heard about different substrates of thread and what they can and can't and shouldn't do. Let's talk about those right now. First off, there are two main substrates that are in quilting. You have quilter's cotton and you have polyester. Now, every company does their weights a little bit different. You have quilting cotton is 50 weight, normal embroidery is 40 weight. There's companies that make 28 weight thread, 12 weight thread. There's Tex threads, all different kinds of stuff. But we're gonna get into the basics of the myths, okay? You cannot mix a polyester thread with a quilter's cotton top, okay? Totally false. People say that because they say, you know what, it's not going to break down at the same level over the next 200 years that a like substrate will break down. Which is true, but does it make a difference? No. Polyester thread is not going to cut through your seams as opposed to a cotton thread. And the fact of the matter is that in 200 years from now, I'm not gonna be worried about whether the thread held up in 200 years being cotton or polyester. Some people also talk about that polyester or cotton, vice versa, will hold up better in a quilt over time, or that your seams will actually be stronger based on what thread you're using. Now, that's partially true, but that also depends greatly on your stitch length, your stitch width, and what type of material you are sewing into or sewing together. If you have a 40 weight thread, which theoretically is a stronger thread than a 50 weight, if you're sewing it at a much, much smaller stitch length, it's going to perforate the thread more and your seams are going to come apart. It's all based on the application of each one of the products. Now we're gonna talk about one of my all-time favorites, and that is myths behind sewing machines. All the time people walk into our shop and say, I want an industrial, heavy-duty machine that will sew through an inch of leather. So unless you're making saddles, I don't know why you would want to sew through an inch of leather. The answer is usually, well, I want a machine that's not gonna break down on me. That is not the same as an industrial machine, and it is not the same as a so-called heavy-duty machine. Years ago, Singer came out with a machine called the Singer Heavy Duty. People went crazy over it. They said, oh my gosh, this is the machine, it's heavy duty, it says it right here on the machine. Not that it's a bad machine, but it's a very standard, normal sewing machine that costs $200 to $300, just like any other Brother, Juki, Janome, etc. That machine, there's nothing special about it. Normal insides of the machine, there aren't very many metal parts inside of it, and quite frankly, it's just a normal base model machine. Singer did such a great job on the heavy duty branding that there are lots of times that people come in and try to sew things that you would never sew on that type of machine and say, what's a heavy duty? It should be able to do this. The idea behind wanting to have an industrial or a heavy duty machine are usually speed and reliability and or toughness. I understand that everybody wants to have a machine that they can rely on, that sews at the speed they need it to, and that's not gonna break down. But let's just face the facts. If you want an industrial machine, that is a machine that's going to do usually just one thing, and that is forwards and backwards. It's not gonna have fancy features, it's not gonna have a computer, but you're also limited in what you can do with that machine. You have this much space that the machine comes in. It comes in a table. There's usually an oil reservoir. It has an external motor, which can be a clutch motor, which is always spinning, or a servo motor, which is another motor that's bolted underneath the machine. 99% of the time, quilters don't need that. Yes, can they sew at 1,100 or 1,200 stitches a minute? Yes, they can. Can you sew that fast? No, you can't. Nobody can. On top of, most of your machines that are your normal domestic machines still sew that fast. So when you are looking at a machine and somebody says, you know, I want a machine that does this, this, and that, the fact of the matter is you want a machine that's reliable and that can sew quickly for your needs. So tell the dealer that you're working with those two things instead of walking in and saying, I want an industrial heavy-duty machine. okay? They're not any better or any worse than a regular sewing machine you're gonna get at your local dealership. Next, let's talk about our binding myths. You have to cut bias binding. You have to hand bind in order for it to be a real quilt. You can't use any kind of cutting devices or rulers to cut your 2.5-inch strips, and 2.5 strips are the only size binding that are accurate. Most of these things are basically just personal preference. You can do bias binding, you can do straight binding. You can use an AccuCut, a laser, whatever you want to cut your strips. They can be 2 inches, they can be 2.5, they can be 2.25. Most of those things are just plain personal preference. It's the way that mom taught you, it's the way the instructor taught you, and that's the way it is. We had a wonderful teacher that used to teach with us years ago that I heard her in her class one day. She loved a certain brand of machine and she loved a certain brand of thread. And everything she said was, this machine, this thread, and this technique. The fact matter is that those things were just her personal preference. They're the way that she learned and it's what she liked. Don't let other people drag you into the myths of the quilting industry. Now let's talk about how Soya fights against all of the quilting myths. Whenever somebody walks in and they have a question or they say, I've heard that this is the way that this thing is, we always share all sides of the story. If someone walks in and says, well, I heard that only this thread can be used with this sewing machine, we usually have the background information to say, you know what, your local dealer probably sells that machine and probably sells that thread. If someone walks in and says, I heard this is the way that you have to do this, it might be a good way to do it, but it doesn't mean it's the only way. So every time that someone comes in and has a quilting myth, we try to give all the background information and let each customer decide what's the best way for them to do it. And the fact of the matter is that whatever works best for you works for us. So we've just debunked just a handful of myths that are here in the quilting industry. But like any good video, there's always a part 2. Down in the comment section, I want you guys to tell me what are myths that you've heard and the reasoning behind them. We'll do a part 2 of this video. As always, don't forget, like, subscribe, and share with your friends. My name's Brody, and I'll see you guys next time.